My accounts were frozen, my assets seized, every dollar, every share, gone. And in that crushing, echoing void, I felt her presence. It wasn't a memory. It was a shadow stretching across the room, a familiar coldness, like a mother's hand on a fevered brow, promising both comfort and finality. It was all her doing. The grieving widow I was so sure I had tricked had been playing me from the very start. I saw her inheritance as my golden ticket, a fast track to the life I knew I deserved. But it wasn't a ticket. It was bait. I thought I was the hunter, but I had stumbled into a trap 30 years in the making, set to avenge a tragedy I knew nothing about. This isn't a story about an entrepreneur who flew too close to the sun. This is the story of how I became a monster, how I was outsmarted by a masterpiece of vengeance, and how I had to piece through the wreckage of my own life to understand why. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand how I lost everything, you first have to understand how I got it. Let's go back to the beginning. Even before I met her, I saw her. For a week, I watched from a corner cafe as she sat alone in the art museum's new wing, the one she'd funded in her husband's name. In the moments before I ever approached her, I saw her staring at a dark, turbulent seascape, and beneath the veil of her public grief, I saw a look of cold, hard steel. She wasn't just mourning. She was hunting, and she had been for a very long time. 3 years ago, my name was Alex, and I was a ghost haunting coffee shops. My startup, Viridian Dynamics, was just me, a laptop, and a mountain of debt. My idea was solid, an AI platform for supply chain logistics, but every venture capital firm saw the desperation fraying the cuffs of my one good suit. I was one missed rent payment away from crawling back to my parents' house, a complete and utter failure. That's when I started reading obituaries. Strategic thinking, I called it. Arthur Vance was a minor legend. His obituary mentioned his devoted wife, Eleanor. No kids, a massive estate, and a trust fund that was now all hers. She was the perfect target. Every day in the museum cafe, she performed the same quiet ritual. She would order a single cup of tea, and I watched the steam rise from the delicate porcelain as she stirred it slowly. The clink of the teaspoon against the china the only sound she made. Her hands, fragile and veined, would linger on the cup's warmth as she stared at that same painting for an hour. Her loneliness was a performance, a trap waiting to be sprung. One afternoon, I accidentally spilled my coffee as she passed. I jumped up, apologizing profusely. She just gave me a small, tired smile. "It's all right," she said, her voice soft and a little raspy. "Some stains are meant to happen." We started talking. I fed her my carefully edited story, leaving out the debt and the obituaries. And she listened with a warmth that felt like coming home. "You really believe in this, don't you?" she asked, her eyes searching mine with a motherly grace that both soothed and unsettled me. We met again, and then again. I was playing the long game, building trust, a sick, calculated performance. What I didn't realize was that every kind smile was another thread in the web closing around me. Shifting from friend to financial advisor was a delicate dance. I never asked for money outright. Instead, I'd sigh over lunch. "I'm just so close." If only I had a partner, not a predator. I started invoking her husband. "He was a builder, wasn't he?" I'd say. "He understood you have to take risks to create something great." I was using her grief as a lever, and it felt disgusting and necessary all at once. Some nights, the weight of my deceit was a physical presence in my bed. But then the sun would rise. I'd see the eviction notice taped to my door, and the guilt would evaporate, replaced by the cold math of survival. It was her or me. I was always going to choose me. The day I went for the kill, we were in Arthur's study at her house, a sprawling mansion that smelled of lemon polish and old leather. A grandfather clock ticked solemnly in the hall. I had my laptop out, showing her a slick presentation full of buzzwords: disruptive technology, high-growth potential, equity. "Eleanor," I said, my voice low and earnest, "Arthur built an empire with smart, aggressive moves. This is a chance to not just preserve his legacy, but to build on it." She was quiet for a long time, her fingers tracing the rim of her teacup. "Arthur was a complicated man," she said softly. "He saw everything as a transaction. He trusted no one, especially not people who claimed they had a big idea." My stomach dropped, but she held up a hand. "But he was also a terrible judge of character," she continued, and for a moment the fog of grief lifted from her eyes, revealing something clear and sharp as a shard of glass. "He surrounded himself with sycophants. You're not like them. You have a fire in your eyes." She walked to a heavy oak desk and pulled out a checkbook. "My financial advisors will throw a fit," she said, a ghost of a smile on her lips. "How much do you need?" I stammered a number that felt impossibly huge. $500,000. She wrote the check without hesitating. "This is a lot of my inheritance, Alex," she said, her voice steady. "My mother always told me to trust a man's fire, but to be wary of what it burns. Please, prove her wrong about you." Holding that check felt like catching lightning, the roar of victory drowning out the tiny whisper of guilt. Her trust felt like my greatest accomplishment, but it was just the first lock clicking shut on the cage she was building for me. That first $500,000 was rocket fuel. I hired coders, rented a slick office, and Viridian Dynamics became real. Eleanor led our Series A round with another $2 million. Her only condition was that she be allowed to recommend a few people. A harmless request. She suggested a new CFO, Marcus Thorne, and a prestigious law firm. She was my guardian angel. My life transformed. I went from a cramped apartment to a glass-walled penthouse. I bought a foreign sports car that cost more than my parents' house. I was on magazine covers, eating at exclusive restaurants with month-long waiting lists, surrounded by shallow friends who loved the new, rich me. I would see them exchange uneasy glances when I'd boast, but I mistook their discomfort for awe. The ghost from the coffee shops was dead. My relationship with Eleanor changed. The weekly calls became a chore. I'd see her name on my phone and swipe it away with a flash of irritation. When she did get through, her questions were becoming specific. "Alex, I was reading about our cash burn rate," she'd say gently. "Has Marcus had a chance to review our equity structure?" Arthur always said the devil is in the details of the shareholder agreements. "Everything is under control, Eleanor," I'd say, my tone dripping with condescension. "Marcus is a pro. Don't you worry your head about a thing." I saw her as a clueless old woman, too sentimental to understand the brutal world of business. I was too busy admiring my castle to notice its foundations were laid with her stone by her architects. The peak came 2 years in. Viridian was valued at over $200 million. Eleanor invited me to a charity gala. I arrived late, making an entrance. I saw her across the room, standing before a massive painting, the same dark, turbulent seascape from the museum. "Eleanor, you look wonderful," I said, kissing her cheek. She looked at me, her eyes unreadable. "You've done well, Alex." Arthur would be surprised. "We've done well," I corrected like a king nodding to a courtier. "I have a question," she said, her voice quiet but cutting through the noise. "If you had to choose your money or your conscience, which would you save?" I laughed. "Eleanor, in this business, the two go hand in hand?" She just looked at me. No smile. For the first time, a real flicker of unease. It wasn't sadness in her eyes. It was something harder. It was assessment. "I'm glad you feel that way," she said before turning and disappearing into the crowd. I didn't realize it, but the game was over. She had just made her final move. My downfall began with a phone call to my parents. I was on top of the world, feet up on my penthouse desk. My mom was on speaker. "We're so proud, Alex," she began, her voice warm. "But please, don't forget where you come from. Don't let all this change the good boy we raised. Are you happy, Alex? Truly happy?" I remember rolling my eyes. "Mom, I'm building an empire. I know what I'm doing." That conversation would come to haunt me. 3 weeks after the gala, the demolition began. Our biggest client pulled their contract. 40% of revenue vanished. A tech journal published a scathing inside job detailing my arrogant leadership. Then the law firm Eleanor recommended triggered a key man risk clause. It was a coup. The board, full of faces I now realized I'd met at her dinners, turned on me. Marcus Thorne, her CFO, presented my own emails, twisted to paint me as incompetent. I was kicked out of my own company. The penthouse grew silent, haunted by the ghosts of parties and fake laughter. My magazine covers, once framed, now mocked me from the top of a trash bin. The final blow was the investigation finding me personally liable for investor losses. Eleanor's lawsuit triggered the letter from the bank. Assets seized. The high-pitched screech of a tow truck was a death knell. I watched from the window as it dragged my sports car away like a body being removed from a crime scene. The friends who had celebrated with me now sent my calls straight to voicemail. Finally, trembling, I called my parents to ask for money. The silence on their end was not an "I told you so." It was worse. It was the sound of their pride shattering. In that moment, I had nothing. I was a ghost once more. Hitting rock bottom is surprisingly quiet. I moved into a dingy one-room apartment. But underneath the shame burned the need to understand why. The sheer artistry of my destruction. It was personal. With the last of my money, I hired a private investigator. I gave him one name, Eleanor Vance. His report rewrote my life. Eleanor wasn't born rich. Her maiden name was O'Connell. Her father, Daniel, owned a manufacturing business he built from scratch. His dark factories were the heart of a community. In the late 80s, his company was the target of a hostile takeover. A corporate raider bankrupted the company, sold it for parts, and left hundreds jobless. The fallout was a plague. Lost homes, shuttered storefronts, Christmases that never came back for families that had worked there for generations. Daniel O'Connell, broken, took his own life. His wife followed soon after, consumed by despair. The corporate raider who destroyed her family? A young, ruthless investor named Arthur Vance. The report laid it all out. Eleanor vanished, then reappeared years later. She accidentally met the newly successful Arthur. For 30 years, she endured it all. The charity galas, the handshakes, smiling beside the man who had broken her world, all while secretly sharpening the blade of her patience. She didn't marry a man. She married her revenge. His death gave her control of the weapon she needed, his fortune. And then I came along, a young, arrogant man who reminded her of a younger version of her husband. When I walked into that museum cafe, I thought I was the predator, but she had been waiting. My con was an audition, and I had landed the part of the perfect effigy she would burn to finally settle her family's debt. A week later, an invitation arrived on heavy, cream-colored cardstock. Tea. I met her at the same museum cafe. The clink of porcelain on saucer sounded like a hammer hitting a nail. Why? Was all I could manage. She took a slow sip, her composure absolute. My father's company was O'Connell Manufacturing, she said calmly, looking past me at that turbulent seascape on the wall. It built things. Arthur Vance destroyed it. Not to build anything better, but for the sport, for the win. He crushed my father, and for 30 years, I lived with that ghost. Her gaze returned to me, cold and clear as ice. Then you came along, she continued, that same hunger. You didn't want to build a business, Alex. You wanted to be rich. You saw a grieving woman and you saw a shortcut, a perfect reflection of him, a smaller, cruder version, but the resemblance was unmistakable. So you destroyed me, I said, my voice flat. No, she corrected, her voice soft as silk. I let you destroy yourself. I simply built the arena, the money, the people. It was a test. Would you build something that lasted, or would your greed consume you? You made your choice, the same one he always did. She softened, a flicker of that motherly grace returning. You had such potential, Alex. It's a shame. I looked up, a foolish flicker of hope in my chest, and then she delivered the final chilling blow. You could have been my redemption, Alex. Instead, you were my rehearsal. She placed a check on the table. $10,000. A severance package, she said. Enough to start over. A real start. I stared at it. My hands started shaking, not with anger, but with the hollow shock of a building imploding. My knees felt weak. This was never about money. It was a lesson. My ruin was the moral of her story. I didn't take the check. As I reached the door, she spoke one last time without turning. Arthur never learned his lesson. I was so hoping you would be different. I don't care what happened to Viridian Dynamics. I'm starting again from zero. But this time, I'm not trying to build an empire. I'm just trying to build a life. What do you think? Was this justice or just revenge? Let me know in the comments. I read them all. And if you've ever been blinded by ambition, you know that the most expensive lessons are the ones that cost you everything. Watch this next for another jaw-dropping tale of greed, betrayal, and revenge you won't see coming.